Hello everybody, the iLord Root here, and welcome back to another episode of Kerbal Aerospace program. So I have had a bit of an absence. I've been helping friends move and I've been real busy at work, but I've been wanting to do this for a while. This episode is dedicated to somewhat stranger plane designs, I guess at least stranger than what you normally see in KSP. And I went ahead, you might have noticed from one of my other episodes from my Let's Play Kerbal Space Program Career Mode episodes, that I have Fire Spitter installed. And so I'm going to bring up something that actually makes a little bit of sense, but you don't generally see in KSP, partially because of the fact that there really are no parts for puller designs. So let's just get that going. My mouse cursor is wigging out just a little bit. Maybe it'll come up. So this is a sort of hybrid design. This is a pusher-puller design. And the nice thing about such a design is that in this case, if we lose one engine, we still have other engines available. So it looks like I didn't really mess around with the pitch controls any, and we will have to mess around with that a little bit. However, we're going to get this thing up to speed. I'm not going to go full throttle with it just yet. But we are going to go ahead and take off and get ourselves up to a reasonable height. Get our trim set properly. And by properly, I don't mean nosing up. This thing is actually rather sensitive. But, I mean, it's not a bad little design because in this instance, we don't... If I flew this thing up to maybe 10k or so, we wouldn't lose too much in the way of maneuverability. We'd lose our engines, but it probably would just glide. So I'm going to come over here and try to maybe land on this landing pad. Because while this is an interesting design, it's really only weird in the sense that this isn't something that KSP would normally allow you to do. And there are viable designs for this. For instance, the Cessna, I think it's the Cessna Skymaster. I'm not a plane person, so I couldn't quite answer that. There is the Adams A500, though, which has a similar design. And it's, this design does see some utility in the real world, as it turns out. And in fact, from what I've read, if you get your pilot certification, if you train in this plane, then you're limited to this sort of plane, at least in the US, because these planes are considerably easier to fly in the circumstances of an emergency. But we'll just bring up the gear really quick, even though we don't really need to. And this thing actually, to my way of thinking, behaves pretty well. Now, unfortunately, I do not have the Mark II cockpit mod installed, which is a shame. I've been trying to find me a good one, and it just really hasn't been easy to find. And it might be a little bit harder because I'm not sure if anybody's seen the news, but they're taking down Spaceport. They're moving it over to Curse. And so I'm not entirely sure what I think of that. As far as I'm concerned, if it takes some of the burden off his squad and allows them to more easily develop the game, then I'm all for it. But this thing actually does have quite a bit of speed on it. You can see we can actually get up to a top speed of maybe 200 meters per second, which is fairly fast at this altitude. I guess it's not quite 200 meters per second, but this is actually not a bad plane at all. Now, one of the interesting things about this parts pack here is that you'll notice that the things like the flaps are integrated directly into the wing, which is rather interesting. You don't see that too terribly often. Now, this I believe is for a a Mustang, if I'm not mistaken. So the design is kind of similar. We've got the retractable landing gear under the wings, and the one thing that does kind of suck about this design is that the brakes, and oh, looks like the brakes went down into the wings. I can't quite get the brakes to work correctly here. I'm just gonna glide in. Brakes need to be off here. Every time I set this, it always ends up crashing. But I'm just going to get down to cruising speed here and hope that maybe I can get this thing set up pretty easily. So this is a reasonable parts pack. I've been thinking about doing some stuff with B9 as well. Because B9 is it's got a lot of interesting things in it. This is more classic planes, but the propellers make it absolutely worth it to install, and they do have some better cockpits. But we are making our close approach right now, and we'll want to align ourselves with the runway. Hopefully we won't take too much time to get over there. But we'll just level ourselves off just a little bit. Now you'll notice something else on here. We actually have, as part of this mod, a part that allows us to set our pitch controls or our trim controls. And that is a rather nifty feature because, as you'll see, some of these planes that I've done have very temperamental trim controls. You have to get them just right. This one you can go without fine controls if you want to, but the next couple of planes are not really going to have that advantage. And in fact, we're going to run into one within this episode that is not going to just require fine control of the pitch. But I'll just throttle up a little bit so we can get a little bit closer to this. Unfortunately, I have this flash flood already parked there, so I have a good idea of how far away I am. But we're getting pretty close to aligned here, and I think we will be pretty close to landing here. Now this runway, as it turns out, is pretty interesting because I gotta be careful here so I don't crash, but or so my game doesn't lag. But this runway is interesting on that it's almost 90 degrees out, or in a 90-degree heading, which is really interesting. I just need to pitch up a little bit, at least until we can get close to the runway. But here we are. And we're still alive somehow. Very interesting. Well, that was interesting. We'll revert back to the space plane hangar and I will show the next plane that we have prepared here. This one that I'm about to show you is rather bizarre. And for those of you who just saw Scott Manley's video, yes, I did work on this right about the same time he probably was. Maybe he actually did do something like this during New Year's for Kerbal, but we have ourselves an asymmetric plane. Now, on his plane, he was actually working on getting, a plane built out of one of every part, and for that reason it was asymmetric. This one, on the other hand, is based off of a real plane. This is based off of the Blohm and Voss BV-141. And there's an interesting little story about this. There is this engineer whose name escapes me at the moment that always submitted these asymmetric plane designs to the Germans during World War II. And in this case, they wanted a plane that had superior visibility. Well, that's a rather tall order. In this case, it's you could go with the traditional design where the propeller would be in the front, and the trouble is that the propeller gets in the way, or you can go somewhere else with it. You can maybe put the propeller behind you, but this guy decided he was going to put the cockpit onto the side, and we'll just begin taking off here. And we are already, as you can see, yawing over. But the BV-141 did look a lot like this. The tailplane was really weird. In fact, because of this, and we have to. Whoa. Okay, we need to do something about the roll correction here because we are rolling way too much. And it's behaving like it's on fine control. But that's one of the reasons why the roll is so weird, is simply because of the fact that that engine, if we don't counteract the roll with our trim, that engine's going to cause it to roll to the right. it calls it to yaw too, so there's an inherent stability problem in this plane. Now, I'm not sure if I'm foolish enough to try to land it on a runway. That would make for an interesting challenge, but you can see we've already got issues with yaw here. And we're yawing to the right here. So let's just get this thing nice and stabilized. We've almost counteracted our roll. But we've also, we want to get our yaw taken care of as well. And I think that'll do us for the roll. We just have to get the yaw corrected. I think we are more or less... Oh, we're still rolling. I have a feeling that I overcorrected for this a bit when designing this plane. But although this design is not perfect, and we'll just turn on SAS here. While this design is not anywhere near perfect, it does have an advantage. We can now look out the bottom and see below us, and this is good if you're like a spy or whatever. Oddly enough, we are practically holding hands with our crewmate. Ain't they cute? They're best buddies forever. But that's basically the idea behind this plane, is that you move the fuselage way out, and then you use trim controls to make sure that these guys can land properly. And it is a slow plane, but it does happen to have the advantage that it looks cool. It's really the only advantage it has. Now imagine if I had designed this a little bit better, we actually could have gotten the weight down just a little bit to where the center of mass really would be in the center. We're also a little bit on the wobbly side. But I'm just going to turn around here, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to try to land because this thing just isn't going to be able to do it. If I were a skilled pilot, perhaps, but that's just not the way it's going. Incidentally, it almost looks as though there's a third person in this cockpit. And maybe in this particular case, it would be good if they didn't read Helicopters for Dummies. Because of course we're not flying a helicopter, we're flying an airplane. Helicopters are something I might do. I haven't really decided about that because helicopters are quite a different beast. And I actually had a friend whose wife wanted to become a helicopter pilot, and you know how you can get I think it's like your first 10 hours of your flight certification and flight simulator. Well, he got her the whole 9 yards. I mean, he got her a proper yoke and everything. And, I'd always played Flight Simulator just with the joystick and regular throttle controls. And I found that even flying the planes was quite a bit different in Flight Simulator with that control. So you can imagine like flying a helicopter where you have to account for your torque. I mean, people do need an insane amount of training in order to fly a helicopter because it's so not the easiest thing in the world to do. And people can kill themselves very easily. I would imagine more easily than in a plane with a helicopter. But imagine the helicopter pilots don't think it's so bad, or maybe they do. I mean, I know I would be scared shitless to try to fly one. But since this is KSP, I'm not technically the one flying it. That would be whoever the unfortunate victim is. Now, you'll notice something really interesting about this plane, too, which is that whenever I pitch up, it wants to roll, and that has a lot to do with the way that engine is set. This plane is essentially flying like a twin engine plane that's had an engine go out. But, yeah, I'm not going to try to land this thing on the runway, I think, but I might here in a bit try to land it on the grass, which is maybe not such a good idea. I mean, the deal is that I found considerable difficulty, I guess, just because of the way these planes are designed. Getting them to brake properly. And I think it has to do with where my front wheels are located. You can see at the moment we're actually doing a pretty good job as long as we pretend that we're in a plane cockpit and not a helicopter cockpit. In fact, let's try to do some tricks. Let's try to do maybe like a barrel roll. I guess it's not really a barrel roll. I'm not exactly sure what you'd call that, but the the fact of the matter is that this thing isn't so bad once you get it in the air. You just have to get your trim set properly. And that's actually what the German pilot said with the real BV-141. The the thing was with the right settings, not a terribly bad plane to fly. Now, can we get our pitch up? Something tells me no. The aerodynamic stress on this is probably going to rip the plane apart. Now imagine if I were to do this in Ferrum Aerospace, which I probably will install after 0.24 comes out, this thing would probably get ripped apart pretty easily. Oh, I see why this thing is having trouble now. It's add SAS on. So yeah, it takes, in that case, I've got 4 reaction wheels on here. Believe it or not, those are largely for mass. Because I was trying to pull the center of mass as close to the propeller as possible. Well, I think this next plane will be interesting to say the least. I'm going to go ahead and try to land this thing. Probably with mixed success. We'll just glide on in there, because landing on that runway, while a good pilot would be able to do it, I'm not sure I designed this thing properly. And we still have roll issues, unfortunately, which have to be corrected for. Yaw issues as well. And now because we're not generating as much lift, we want to bring up the pitch just a little bit. But that engine will cut off. And we will just try to land somewhere that hopefully will not kill us. And we are getting pretty close. So let's make this as graceful of a touchdown as possible. Although I suspect that what will happen is it will flip over, because the wheels are a little bit too high. Or maybe not. And why can't I shut off this engine? Is it... That was actually a little bit better than I thought it would be. So I crashed the plane that was supposed to be easier to fly, and I landed the one that was supposed to be a veritable pain. What's up with that? Well, that leads me to my next design, because this one is a rather huge pain. This is a parasol wing plane. And basically the idea is that the wings aren't attached to the fuselage directly. Now this thing does have problems, but it's worth pointing out that center of lift is not necessarily one of them. I mean, yeah, it's going to want to flip this thing over, because the center of lift is slightly higher up than the center of mass. But you can see it's well behind the center of mass as well. And as far as fuel balance, what I've done is I've taken these drop tanks here, and I've just attached them to the underside of the wing. Now I'm going to show you real quick the ramifications of this design at full throttle, because it took me a couple of moments to figure out what was going on with this. If we get our pitch set correctly in our roll, because this thing does seem to have a habit of rolling, and I'm not entirely sure why, but if we bring this thing up to full throttle, it'll just flip over immediately. Although, as you can see, we somehow managed to survive. But that's not generally a good deal. And the reason for that is because our center of lift is above our center of mass, so it's wanting to pull this tail up. The way we get around this is we bring this up to maybe 1/10 of the thrust. And that's going to be sufficient because this actually does take, it does have a fair amount of power. The thrust to weight ratio, in case you're curious, is 6 at the moment. And it's, whoa, why can't I pull up? Okay, yeah, my roll correction is not quite what I wanted it to be. And there we go. This thing, even with fine control, is a little bit too responsive. I'm going to put fine control on so that we can get this thing going down. Maintaining level flight is certainly a challenge here. As you can see, we're, as low as we are, we're actually moving pretty fast. And if we look at this vessel, thrust to weight ratio is almost 6. When this thing runs out of fuel, then it's going to be substantially higher. And that does bother me a little bit. We need to roll the other way. Perhaps the roll correction was not the brightest idea. That's part of the deal with like adjusting trim in this game, is that sometimes you don't quite get the results you would think you would get. But we'll just turn around here. We'll fly around a bit. This thing is an insane amount of lift. And it is in fact possible to land this one. You just have to be very careful with it. It's so responsive that you do run into trouble actually maintaining the heading you want to maintain. So that's a problem for this plane. Now, planes like this were surprisingly a little bit more common in the early era of aviation. And a good example of this particular sort of plane, although not as crazily designed, is the PBY, what's it called? The PBY Catalina, I believe, is such a plane. They didn't have the canards on the front, of course. The reason I put the canards there incidentally was to make this thing a little bit easier to control. Because if we didn't bring that center of lift down, and what would have happened is that our tail flipping issue would have been much worse. Now I don't know if that is due to spin down or not. Yeah, we got plenty of fuel on this thing though, and I've got it to where each engine has two of its own tanks. You'll see the difficulty in landing this thing here in a bit. I mean, you do have to be fairly good to land it, and I'm not terribly good. Or maybe I should say that you have to be better than I am. But if you can get past the control issues, and that's half the battle with this plane, then it should be possible. Just not very easy. And that's really been one of the bigger challenges here, is that one of the things that would be really nice is to be able to add dead weight to the plane. Oh, we need to dive a little bit. Bring down our altitude some. Yeah, it would be really nice to be able to add dead weight to the plane without really compromising functionality too much. In this case, the drop tanks just seem to be the best way to go about it, but you'll notice that in my last episode, I actually did have to jump through a bunch of hoops in order to get the plane properly balanced, because generally what will happen with these is that the fuel is actually stored in the wingtips. So your center of mass may change very slightly because the fuel's sloshing around, but they put baffles in the wingtips as well to prevent that, but generally it doesn't, your center of mass doesn't move forward or backward nearly as much as it does in KSP. But that's the trade-off we make, because if they modeled fuel tanks correctly, we would actually have a lot of problems flying rockets, because you can imagine getting the fuel flow through the tank of a rocket is a lot more difficult than it's all cracked up to be. It's certainly not as easy as it would be in Kerbal space program, where you can sort of count on your rockets to magically take care of that for you. So it's sort of a trade-off, because we want the center of mass to move down towards the bottom of the rocket, where the rocket would be more stable. We've instead got this issue to where in KSP you have to proactively manage your fuel flow for planes, And I've tried several ways to get around it. It takes a little bit in the way of. I don't want to say it takes ingenuity to get around that because I mean the problem isn't too terribly hard to solve as such, but it does take some thinking. You can see we're coming in here nice and slow, and I'm gonna completely reduce the roll on here, I think. Now it's time for us to begin bringing this still up just a little bit. We are slowing down quite a bit. We do want to arrest our vertical velocity as much as possible. Because I don't think I'm going to make it. See, that's the thing that happens when you try to land this guy. Is that may have to do with my it's. Oh, let me see if I can find that. Yeah, it's something I noticed earlier. Is that these wheels will just sort of go on screeching on their own. But I guess before we call it a night, I will try one more thing. I definitely want to see how far we could maybe take this the other direction to where we can see something interesting. So I'm going to turn off the roll control here, the roll trim, and we'll just go with our regular flight profile here. Maybe that will help us without that roll correction. It'll help us just a little bit. We are rolling just a little bit in the opposite direction, and that's going to be an issue for us. But we'll just go ahead. We'll make a really tight turn around here. And then maybe fly over to those mountains. This seems like a really good idea to me. And I wonder what kind of issues this thing will suffer as a result. I mean, we've got plenty of intake air, and we do need a lot of it. I mean, we do need to pay attention to how our intake air is being managed, surely, but that may not be as big of a problem here. You can see liquid fuel is being used very efficiently. And there goes Skype. And that is one of the nice things about these propellers. I mean, the specific impulse is actually not as high as it could be with this. And we are sort of reaching our service ceiling, but we are getting a pretty good deal going on here. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to bother really landing this. Just because... Well, actually, I guess I could. It seems like it's a lot easier to land this on regular ground. Of course, we're going to be sloping up. But that seemed to work pretty well last time. So yeah, why don't we try landing it on the ground this time? Just to see how that's going to affect our landing. Because I've always seemed to have a little bit more success when landing on the ground. And that would possibly be something worth testing. And for some reason our engine's still going. I haven't really figured out. Maybe it has to do with this turbofan in the back here must still be moving. That probably explains why we're hauling ass flying this thing. But I guess while we're at it, why don't we see if maybe we can do a cockpit landing? We are landing pretty gracefully with this. We just have to be really careful, I think, and we'll get our landing. I definitely want to get this down to a couple hundred meters, I think. And we are getting there. You can see our altimeter is bringing us down. We just have to be really careful here and not let the roll correction cause too many issues. I'm going to use this one window down here that's a nifty part of our cockpit, and I'm going to just continue to pitch up. Get this guy coming down as quickly and as gracefully as possible. Now this thing may eventually flip out because I don't think I adjusted the brakes on it. But we are coming up on this hill, which may be good for us to try to fly over. Maybe. I really didn't have in-flight visibility factored into this equation either. Those canards are very much in the way. But there really was no other place to put them, you see. But I think, it's hard to tell. I think we're our wings are lined up properly. But if we could land this thing, I would be very happy about that. And this thing is just taking forever to get down. But I think it's a good start. And yeah, probably should have taken the brakes off. I wonder, are my wings still moving around? I mean, I guess at least I didn't kill the Kerbals this time. But that will just have to do for now, I imagine. And until then, this has been Dilord Root, and I will see you next time.